Have you ever wondered about the quiet strength of the women in our lives, the ones who shaped us with their love and wisdom? Today, I want to share with you a true story about a grandma who, in her own way, showed us the true meaning of resilience and love. Her journey, full of quiet sacrifices and unexpected twists, will remind you of the power that family and love hold. Stay with me as we dive into this heartfelt story that speaks to the heart of what it means to be a grandmother. A strange story, how my grandma protected our family in a way no one else dared. The beginning. There are moments in life when something so small, so fleeting, happens that it sends a ripple through everything you thought you knew. For me, that moment came on a crisp fall afternoon, long after I had convinced myself that the past was behind me. It wasn't a grand revelation or a dramatic event, just an ordinary day that felt like any other, until I picked up that old dusty photograph from the back of a drawer. I wasn't expecting it. I had no intention of revisiting the past. But there it was, staring back at me, as though it had been waiting all these years for me to finally notice. The photo was black and white, faded at the edges, but unmistakable in its clarity. My grandmother standing tall in the kitchen, her hands on her hips, wearing that familiar apron I had once pulled from her after each family dinner. I had spent countless hours in that very kitchen learning her ways, the way she braided my hair, the way she stirred the soup, and the way she protected us all. But at that moment, I didn't realize it. I had been too young, too naive, to see how strong and steadfast she was, the way she kept our family safe in ways no one else could. Even as a child, I thought of her as someone who could handle anything. But when I looked at that photograph, the weight of those memories I had pushed aside for years, came rushing back, hitting me like a freight train. There was a story hidden beneath the surface of that photo, a story I had never fully understood, nor had anyone dared to tell me. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the outline of her face in the photograph. Grandma had passed away nearly a decade ago, and the house where she once lived had been sold long ago. But her presence, her strength, had never truly left me. It had lingered in the corners of my heart, quietly waiting to resurface. And now, after all these years, it finally had. I never thought much about the stories she would tell, those long evenings on the porch when the world seemed to slow down. She would recount the family history with a smile, her voice soft, yet filled with a quiet wisdom. I'd listen half-heartedly as a child, more interested in the sound of crickets than the words she spoke. Little did I know then, her stories were more than just tales of the past. They were filled with secrets of sacrifice, courage, and an unspoken love that ran deeper than I could ever comprehend. As I sat there holding the photograph, I realized that I had never truly understood the magnitude of what she had done for us. The sacrifices she had made for our family went beyond what I had ever imagined. And as I continued to stare at that image, the question formed in my mind. What did she protect us from exactly? That question began to unravel something inside me, a long-forgotten thread that tugged at my soul. I had always thought of my grandmother as a simple woman, living a simple life. But as I looked closer, I realized there was more to her than I had ever noticed. She had been our shield, the quiet force that kept everything together when the rest of the world seemed to be falling apart. I had never known just how far she was willing to go for us, how deeply she cared, and how much she had endured to keep our family intact. The story of her life, of her protection, was something I had never been fully ready to hear. But now, as the years had passed and time had softened the sharp edges of my grief, I was ready. I was ready to listen. And so, it began. The story of how my grandmother had protected our family in a way no one else dared would soon come to light. It was a story that had been hidden in the corners of our lives, tucked away in quiet moments, waiting for the right time to be revealed. A story that would change everything I thought I knew about her, and about the strength that runs through the heart of a family. Introducing the main character. I always considered myself a practical person, someone who didn't dwell much on the past. I'm in my late 60s now, and my life has been one of steady rhythm. I wake up early, sip my coffee slowly, and enjoy the quiet mornings in my cozy little home in a small town just outside of Atlanta. It's the kind of place where the leaves turn golden in the fall, and the neighborhood still has that old charm, where everyone knows everyone, and a friendly wave is all you need to feel connected. These days, I spend a lot of time by myself. My children are grown, and the house, once filled with the sounds of their laughter, now stands silent. My husband passed away several years ago, leaving me with only the memories of a shared life, a life that seems so distant now, like a story from another lifetime. I've gotten used to it. But every now and then, when the wind blows just right, or the light in the room feels particularly warm, I feel the ghosts of those days. I've never been one for fancy things, but I suppose that's because I've always been satisfied with what I had. My days are filled with simple pleasures, tending to my garden, reading a good book, and spending time with friends from the past. I've come to realize, however, that even in the stillness of my everyday routine, there's an underlying hum of something else, something unspoken. The truth is, I've always carried a quiet grief inside me. It's the kind of grief you can't really explain to anyone else because it's not the kind that comes from a single event. It's the weight of years, of all the things left unsaid, all the things I didn't have the courage to confront. For a long time, I thought I could bury it. But as the years have gone by, I've realized that grief doesn't just vanish. It lingers, tucked away in the folds of your heart, waiting for the right moment to surface. My grandmother, the woman in the photograph, was always the one who held things together when I couldn't. She was the calm in the storm, the one who knew how to make everything feel okay, even when it wasn't. I suppose I've always admired her for that. But as I look back now, I wonder, did she carry her own grief? Did she hide her pain behind that quiet strength the way I've learned to do? Growing up, I always saw my grandmother as invincible. She was the matriarch of our family, the glue that held everyone together. She had an air of dignity about her, a grace that seemed to come naturally. She didn't have much in terms of material wealth, but there was something about her that made you feel rich. It wasn't in the things she owned or the clothes she wore. It was in the way she carried herself, the way she made every person in the room feel important, no matter their station in life. As a young girl, I thought she was just a grandmother. You know, the kind who bakes cookies, knits scarves, and tells you stories about the good old days. I didn't realize back then that she was so much more. She was a woman who had lived through hardship, who had seen things I could never fully understand at the time. But now, looking back, I realized that there was so much about her life that she never spoke of. So many things she kept hidden from us all. When I was younger, I remember feeling safe in her presence, even when the world seemed like a confusing place. Her voice, soft yet firm, always made everything feel okay. She knew when to speak and when to just be there. I never once questioned her decisions, never wondered why she did the things she did. But now, as I sit here alone, I find myself asking questions I never dared ask before. Did she know something I didn't? Did she protect us in ways that I'll never truly understand? I can still hear her voice like it was yesterday, telling me how important family was, how love could heal even the deepest wounds. But as the years passed and I grew older, I began to realize that love wasn't always enough. Life was harder than we had been led to believe, and there were things we couldn't protect each other from. I think that's when I started to see her differently. She wasn't just a caretaker, she was a warrior, a woman who fought battles in silence, who carried the weight of the world without ever showing it. As I sit in my chair now, reflecting on my own life, I understand that the strength she displayed was something I've always strived for, but never quite mastered. There's an old saying that you don't truly appreciate something until it's gone. I didn't appreciate my grandmother's strength until I no longer had her there to guide me. Now, I'm left with the quiet echoes of her wisdom and the overwhelming urge to understand her better, to uncover the truths she kept hidden. And so, I find myself wondering, what was she really protecting us from? What was so dangerous that she had to shield us in ways we never even realized? Introducing the main character. I often find myself sitting on the old rocking chair in the corner of the living room, the one that creaks with every motion, just like it always did when I was a child. The rhythmic sound is strangely comforting, though it also carries a sense of nostalgia that tugs at my heart. As the years roll on, I've come to realize that the simple moments, the quiet ones, are often the most powerful. They carry with them the weight of time and the quiet whisper of everything that came before. As I sit there, I think about my own children, grown now, with lives of their own. I raised them with love, just like my grandmother had done for me. But somehow, I never quite measured up to her. Perhaps I was too eager to be practical, to keep things running smoothly. My grandmother didn't do anything in a hurry. She lived with intention, something that I've spent my life trying to learn. She had a grace that could not be mimicked, a wisdom that wasn't taught but simply absorbed through years of living a life filled with love and sacrifice. I remember her voice, a steady hum of reassurance. "We don't know what tomorrow brings, but we do know that today we have each other," she would say. It was a simple thought, but one that anchored me during my toughest moments. At the time, I thought of it as just another grandmotherly saying, something to make me feel better when I was upset. But now, as the years have passed, I realize that it was a quiet reminder of the most important thing in life: family. I often wonder what it would be like if she were still here. What would she say now in these days when the world seems so uncertain? Would she still remind me to cherish those around me? Or would she have more advice to share? Advice for a world so different from the one she knew? My mind drifts back to when I was younger, and my grandmother seemed to be the one constant in a world that was always shifting. She had a way of making everything feel safe, of making the most difficult days seem manageable. I didn't realize it at the time, but my grandmother was a protector, and her love was more than just affection. It was a shield, an invisible force that kept us all grounded. But as I grew older, life became more complicated. We all face our challenges, and I found myself facing my own battles with a sense of fear I hadn't known before. When my husband passed away, it felt as if the earth beneath me had shifted. Suddenly, I was alone, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to feel vulnerable. I didn't have my grandmother's wisdom to turn to, and I found myself floundering in a sea of uncertainty. In the midst of my grief, I longed for the steady presence of her voice, the one that had always been there to guide me. And yet, despite all of the pain, I began to see something else, something that had always been there, but that I had never fully recognized until now. The quiet strength my grandmother had shown me wasn't gone. It was inside me. It had always been there, passed down through the generations. In those early days of loneliness, I began to lean on the lessons she had taught me, even if I didn't fully understand them at the time. I learned that love, even in the darkest of times, has the power to heal. I learned that family is a bond that can never be broken, no matter the distance or the years that separate us. And most importantly, I learned that the strength I had always admired in my grandmother wasn't something she had been born with. It was something she had cultivated over a lifetime of living with purpose and intention. Now, as I sit here, surrounded by the quiet of my home, I think about the kind of legacy I want to leave behind. My grandmother's love was a quiet force, but it was the most powerful thing I've ever known. It protected me, and it protected all of us. And it's a legacy I hope to carry forward, even if I don't always feel like I'm as capable as she was. It's strange, isn't it? How we can live our lives surrounded by the people we love, yet still feel like something is missing. I suppose it's just the nature of the human heart. We always want more love, more understanding, more time. But as I grow older, I've come to realize that what matters most is the love we have in the present, the love we share with the people around us. And perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest gift we can give to those we love is the strength to carry on, even when the world feels heavy. As I sit here with the photograph of my grandmother, I realize that the story of her protection, the story I've been avoiding for so long, isn't just about her. It's about all of us. It's about the love that we pass down, the strength that we share, and the quiet sacrifices that often go unnoticed until we look back and truly see them for what they are. Family and the story. Growing up in our family, the kitchen always felt like the heart of the home. It was the place where meals were made, where stories were shared, and where the world felt a little smaller. Grandma's kitchen was the one place that could make me feel safe, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Her house was modest, a small 2-bedroom cottage at the edge of town. It had that old-fashioned charm, the kind of house that smelled of baking bread and freshly brewed coffee. There were always fresh flowers on the table, the soft sound of her voice humming a tune as she moved about. Her home was filled with love, not in grand gestures or expensive gifts, but in the way she cared for us, in the way she made sure we knew we were never alone, no matter what the world threw our way. But the house wasn't always this peaceful. Behind the walls of that little cottage, there were stories of pain, struggle, and heartbreak, some of which I hadn't known until much later in life. You see, Grandma wasn't just the kind woman who baked pies for us or told bedtime stories. She was a warrior, fighting battles we couldn't even imagine. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when our family was torn apart by things we couldn't control. My father, a man who worked hard his whole life, was often distant, his mind occupied by the struggles of the world. He was a kind man, but his love for us was wrapped in a heavy silence, a silence that I never understood until years later. My mother, on the other hand, was a fiery spirit, strong-willed and passionate. But the burden of caring for a family while navigating her own struggles left her worn and weary. There were moments when the love between them seemed strained, as if they were both doing their best to hold it all together. But something always seemed to slip through the cracks. I remember the moments when the house was filled with tension, when the air grew thick with unspoken words. There were fights, small arguments, big disagreements, and there were days when the house felt like a pressure cooker, ready to burst. My parents tried their best, but life had a way of getting in the way, and the stress of work, of money, of raising a family took its toll. It was during these times that Grandma would step in. She wasn't the kind of person who offered advice unless it was asked for. Instead, she would simply be there, offering her quiet presence, like a steady rock in the middle of a storm. I remember the way she would sit at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening intently to whatever was being said. There were no grand speeches, no attempts to fix things. Instead, her silence was a comfort, a reminder that even when everything else felt out of control, there was always something we could rely on. She would make a cup of tea, and we would sit together in the silence, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. And somehow, in those moments, everything would feel okay again. She had this uncanny ability to make us feel like the weight of the world didn't have to rest on our shoulders, that it was okay to just breathe, to just be. But what I didn't know at the time was that Grandma's quiet strength was rooted in a past filled with pain and sacrifice. She had grown up in a time when women were expected to keep their heads down, to carry the burden of family without question. She had faced struggles that most of us could never imagine, yet she never let it show. There were whispers, stories that I would overhear when I was older, about her early life. Stories of a family torn apart by poverty, of dreams that were crushed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Grandma had lost so much in her lifetime, yet she never allowed herself to be defined by it. She had lived through heartbreak, loss, and hardship, but somehow she still managed to find a way to love us unconditionally. She never spoke much about her own past, but there were glimpses. The small details she would let slip when she thought no one was listening. I remember her telling me, when I was much younger, that the hardest thing she had ever done was to forgive. Forgive the people who had wronged her. Forgive the choices she had made. And most importantly, forgive herself. It wasn't until I grew older that I truly understood the depth of her words. Grandma had carried so much on her shoulders, so many things that she had never let anyone see. Yet, through it all, she had managed to protect us, to keep our family together in ways that none of us truly understood at the time. It was as if she knew that the only way to survive was through love, even when the world seemed to be falling apart around us. The more I reflect on those years, the more I realize just how much she had done for us. And it wasn't just about protecting us from external dangers. It was about protecting our hearts, about shielding us from the wounds that life can leave behind. She had a quiet way of doing that, by never asking for anything in return, by giving of herself completely, and by making us feel safe even when we were too young to understand what we needed protection from. Grandma had taught me the most important lesson of all, that love, real love, is about sacrifice. It's about putting others before yourself, about giving without expectation. And that's the kind of love she gave us, the kind of love that will live on in me, even long after she's gone. Introducing the main character. I often find myself sitting on the old rocking chair in the corner of the living room, the one that creaks with every motion, just like it always did when I was a child. The rhythmic sound is strangely comforting, though it also carries a sense of nostalgia that tugs at my heart. As the years roll on, I've come to realize that the simple moments, the quiet ones, are often the most powerful. They carry with them the weight of time and the quiet whisper of everything that came before. As I sit there, I think about my own children, grown now, with lives of their own. I raised them with love, just like my grandmother had done for me. But somehow, I never quite measured up to her. Perhaps I was too eager to be practical, to keep things running smoothly. My grandmother didn't do anything in a hurry. She lived with intention, something that I've spent my life trying to learn. She had a grace that could not be mimicked, a wisdom that wasn't taught but simply absorbed through years of living a life filled with love and sacrifice. I remember her voice, a steady hum of reassurance. We don't know what tomorrow brings, but we do know that today we have each other, she would say. It was a simple thought, but one that anchored me during my toughest moments. At the time, I thought of it as just another grandmotherly saying, something to make me feel better when I was upset. But now, as the years have passed, I realize that it was a quiet reminder of the most important thing in life: family. I often wonder what it would be like if she were still here. What would she say now, in these days when the world seems so uncertain? Would she still remind me to cherish those around me? Or would she have more advice to share? Advice for a world so different from the one she knew? My mind drifts back to when I was younger, and my grandmother seemed to be the one constant in a world that was always shifting. She had a way of making everything feel safe, of making the most difficult days seem manageable. I didn't realize it at the time, but my grandmother was a protector, and her love was more than just affection. It was a shield, an invisible force that kept us all grounded. But as I grew older, life became more complicated. We all face our challenges, and I found myself facing my own battles with a sense of fear I hadn't known before. When my husband passed away, it felt as if the earth beneath me had shifted. Suddenly, I was alone, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to feel vulnerable. I didn't have my grandmother's wisdom to turn to, and I found myself floundering in a sea of uncertainty. In the midst of my grief, I longed for the steady presence of her voice, the one that had always been there to guide me. And yet, despite all of the pain, I began to see something else, something that had always been there, but that I had never fully recognized until now. The quiet strength my grandmother had shown me wasn't gone. It was inside me. It had always been there, passed down through the generations. In those early days of loneliness, I began to lean on the lessons she had taught me, even if I didn't fully understand them at the time. I learned that love, even in the darkest of times, has the power to heal. I learned that family is a bond that can never be broken, no matter the distance or the years that separate us. And most importantly, I learned that the strength I had always admired in my grandmother wasn't something she had been born with. It was something she had cultivated over a lifetime of living with purpose and intention. Now, as I sit here, surrounded by the quiet of my home, I think about the kind of legacy I want to leave behind. My grandmother's love was a quiet force, but it was the most powerful thing I've ever known. It protected me, and it protected all of us. And it's a legacy I hope to carry forward, even if I don't always feel like I'm as capable as she was. It's strange, isn't it? How we can live our lives surrounded by the people we love, yet still feel like something is missing. I suppose it's just the nature of the human heart. We always want more love, more understanding, more time. But as I grow older, I've come to realize that what matters most is the love we have in the present, the love we share with the people around us. And perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest gift we can give to those we love is the strength to carry on, even when the world feels heavy. As I sit here with the photograph of my grandmother, I realize that the story of her protection, the story I've been avoiding for so long, isn't just about her. It's about all of us. It's about the love that we pass down, the strength that we share, and the quiet sacrifices that often go unnoticed until we look back and truly see them for what they are. Family and the story. Growing up in our family, the kitchen always felt like the heart of the home. It was the place where meals were made, where stories were shared, and where the world felt a little smaller. Grandma's kitchen was the one place that could make me feel safe, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Her house was modest, a small 2-bedroom cottage at the edge of town. It had that old-fashioned charm, the kind of house that smelled of baking bread and freshly brewed coffee. There were always fresh flowers on the table, the soft sound of her voice humming a tune as she moved about. Her home was filled with love, not in grand gestures or expensive gifts, but in the way she cared for us, in the way she made sure we knew we were never alone, no matter what the world threw our way. But the house wasn't always this peaceful. Behind the walls of that little cottage, there were stories. Stories of pain, struggle, and heartbreak, some of which I hadn't known until much later in life. You see, Grandma wasn't just the kind woman who baked pies for us or told bedtime stories. She was a warrior, fighting battles we couldn't even imagine. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when our family was torn apart by things we couldn't control. My father, a man who worked hard his whole life, was often distant, his mind occupied by the struggles of the world. He was a kind man, but his love for us was wrapped in a heavy silence, a silence that I never understood until years later. My mother, on the other hand, was a fiery spirit, strong-willed and passionate. But the burden of caring for a family while navigating her own struggles left her worn and weary. There were moments when the love between them seemed strained, as if they were both doing their best to hold it all together. But something always seemed to slip through the cracks. I remember the moments when the house was filled with tension, when the air grew thick with unspoken words. There were fights, small arguments, big disagreements, and there were days when the house felt like a pressure cooker, ready to burst. My parents tried their best, but life had a way of getting in the way, and the stress of work, of money, of raising a family took its toll. It was during these times that Grandma would step in. She wasn't the kind of person who offered advice unless it was asked for. Instead, she would simply be there, offering her quiet presence, like a steady rock in the middle of a storm. I remember the way she would sit at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening intently to whatever was being said. There were no grand speeches, no attempts to fix things. Instead, her silence was a comfort, a reminder that even when everything else felt out of control, there was always something we could rely on. She would make a cup of tea, and we would sit together in the silence, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. And somehow, in those moments, everything would feel okay again. She had this uncanny ability to make us feel like the weight of the world didn't have to rest on our shoulders, that it was okay to just breathe, to just be. But what I didn't know at the time was that Grandma's quiet strength was rooted in a past filled with pain and sacrifice. She had grown up in a time when women were expected to keep their heads down, to carry the burden of family without question. She had faced struggles that most of us could never imagine, yet she never let it show. There were whispers, stories that I would overhear when I was older, about her early life. Stories of a family torn apart by poverty, of dreams that were crushed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Grandma had lost so much in her lifetime, yet she never allowed herself to be defined by it. She had lived through heartbreak, loss, and hardship, but somehow she still managed to find a way to love us unconditionally. She never spoke much about her own past, but there were glimpses. The small details she would let slip when she thought no one was listening. I remember her telling me, when I was much younger, that the hardest thing she had ever done was to forgive. Forgive the people who had wronged her. Forgive the choices she had made. And most importantly, forgive herself. It wasn't until I grew older that I truly understood the depth of her words. Grandma had carried so much on her shoulders, so many things that she had never let anyone see. Yet, through it all, she had managed to protect us, to keep our family together in ways that none of us truly understood at the time. It was as if she knew that the only way to survive was through love, even when the world seemed to be falling apart around us. The more I reflect on those years, the more I realize just how much she had done for us. And it wasn't just about protecting us from external dangers. It was about protecting our hearts, about shielding us from the wounds that life can leave behind. She had a quiet way of doing that, by never asking for anything in return, by giving of herself completely, and by making us feel safe even when we were too young to understand what we needed protection from. Grandma had taught me the most important lesson of all, that love, real love, is about sacrifice. It's about putting others before yourself, about giving without expectation. And that's the kind of love she gave us, the kind of love that will live on in me, even long after she's gone. The first loss. It was a cold December afternoon when the phone call came. The kind of day where the sky hung heavy with the weight of impending snow, and the air felt sharp, like it could cut right through you. I had just finished baking a batch of cookies, Grandma's recipe, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window as the first flakes of snow began to fall. The house was quiet, and for a moment, it felt as though time had slowed down. It was in that silence that the phone rang. I remember the chill that ran down my spine the moment I picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm, as though they were trying to soften the blow of something inevitable. It was the doctor's office. My husband had suffered a heart attack. He had been rushed to the hospital, but it didn't look good. He was stable for now, but the prognosis wasn't promising. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook as I gripped the phone tighter, trying to hold on to something, anything that could keep me grounded. I don't remember much of the conversation after that, just a haze of disbelief and panic. I told them I would be right there, but my legs felt like they had turned to jelly. I hung up the phone and sat there, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. It wasn't just the shock of hearing the words. It was the weight of everything that had been unsaid, the things left unfinished. My husband and I had grown distant over the years. There had been so many things we never talked about, so many words we left unspoken. And now, standing at the edge of this moment, I realized that time had run out for us. It was as though I was looking at my life from the outside, watching it unravel, unable to do anything to stop it. I rushed to the hospital, my thoughts a jumble of fear and regret. When I arrived, they took me straight to the waiting room. I sat there, alone, staring at the sterile walls, my mind racing. I wanted to be strong, to hold it together, but I couldn't. The tears started to fall, silently at first, then more steadily, until I was consumed by the grief that had been slowly building up over the years. I didn't realize it then, but this was the first real loss of my life. Not just the loss of my husband, but the loss of everything I thought I knew about love, about life, and about who I was. We often think of loss as something we can prepare for, something that makes sense, but the truth is, there's no preparing for it. When it happens, it knocks you to your knees, and all you can do is try to find the strength to stand again. Grandma's words came to me then, her quiet, unwavering voice reminding me of the power of love, of the strength we carry inside us, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. I didn't understand it at the time, but looking back, I realized that she had always known that love was both the greatest gift and the greatest burden. And in that moment, as I sat in the hospital waiting for news, I began to understand the depth of her wisdom. The hours seemed to stretch on forever, each one heavier than the last. I felt as though I was waiting for a decision I had no control over, a decision that would change the course of my life forever. When the doctor finally came into the room, his face was grim, and I knew. The moment he spoke, everything in my world shifted. My husband was gone. In that instant, I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I could barely process the words he was saying. It was all too much, too fast. The life I had known was slipping away, and I didn't know how to hold on. The days that followed were a blur. There were arrangements to be made, people to call, things to sort out. But amidst all the chaos, there was one thing that stood out. Grandma. She was there, as she always had been, a steady presence in the storm. She came to my house that evening, not with words of comfort, but with quiet strength. She sat with me on the couch, her hand resting gently on mine. There were no grand speeches, no promises that everything would be okay. Just her presence, her calming energy, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes there is nothing to say. Sometimes you just need someone to sit with you, to share the silence, to remind you that even in the darkest moments, you are not alone. I remember her telling me that grief would come in waves, that it would hit me when I least expected it, and that it would feel overwhelming at times. But she also reminded me that I had survived loss before, and I would survive this too. Her strength, her quiet resolve, was a lifeline in that moment. A lifeline that I would hold on to in the weeks and months to come. Looking back, I realized that this loss, though devastating, was the beginning of a journey I would never have expected. It was the beginning of understanding what it truly meant to live, to love, and to let go. And as I sat there with Grandma in the quiet of that evening, I realized that even in the face of loss, there was still so much to be grateful for. The years of prosperity. In the years that followed, life continued to move forward in a way that seemed almost surreal. My husband's death, as painful as it was, somehow carved a new space in my life, a space I didn't know I needed until it was there. The first few months were the hardest. There was a constant ache in my chest, a feeling that I was walking through life with a heavy weight that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the grief of losing him, but the realization that I had lost the future I thought we would have together. All the plans we made, the dreams we shared, they were all gone in an instant, swept away by a sudden heart attack. But life, in its own quiet way, has a tendency to carry you forward, whether you're ready or not. My children were grown and had their own families now, which left me with the silence of an empty house. I filled the void with work, keeping busy as a way of distracting myself from the reality of being alone. I took on extra hours, threw myself into projects that had been sitting on the back burner for years. I didn't know what else to do. And yet, even in the busyness, I began to notice something else emerging. A strength, a resilience that had always been there, but had been overshadowed by the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood. I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant, hidden away under the weight of daily life. It was as if my husband's death had cracked open a door I didn't know existed, and on the other side, I found a version of myself I hadn't recognized for a long time. Grandma had always talked about the importance of self-reliance, of standing tall even when life knocked you down. She'd been through so much herself, had lived through a time when women were expected to stay silent and simply endure, but she never complained. She had always been strong, even when I couldn't see it. I wondered more than once how she had done it. How had she managed to carry such weight without letting it break her? Now, in the quiet of my own grief, I began to understand. Over time, I started to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it was necessary. I joined a local book club, something I'd always wanted to do, but had never had the time for. I started taking walks in the park, something simple, yet so grounding. The sun on my face, the rustling of the leaves, these small moments became my anchor. I learned to embrace the solitude, to find comfort in my own company. But the most unexpected change came when I began to reconnect with my family. After years of being focused on the everyday grind, I finally started to see them, not just as my children or my siblings, but as people with their own stories, their own struggles, their own joys. We had all been so busy with our lives that we had forgotten to really connect, to share what we had been through. I remember one evening when I invited my children over for dinner. We sat around the table talking and laughing, sharing stories about their lives. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of warmth that had been missing for so long. Grandma had always believed that family was everything. She would often say that no matter what happened in life, the love of family was the one thing you could count on. I didn't fully understand that until I began to rebuild my own relationships. It wasn't about perfection or about everything being exactly how it once was. It was about showing up for each other, about being there through the good and the bad. I started to see my children in a new light, as individuals with their own hopes and dreams. They weren't just my kids anymore. They were adults, each with their own challenges, their own victories. And through it all, we were still a family, bound together by a love that had weathered its fair share of storms. The years that followed were not without their own challenges, but they were different from the ones I had faced before. They were filled with small moments of joy, quiet victories, and the realization that life had more to offer than I had once believed. The grief of losing my husband never fully went away. It never could. But it didn't consume me either. I had learned to live with it, to carry it with me, and to honor it by continuing to live. And in the midst of all this, I began to see the truth in Grandma's words. Love, family, and resilience were the cornerstones of life. They were the things that kept you going when everything else felt lost. They were the things that gave you strength when you thought you had none left. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come. I've built a life that, while different from what I once imagined, is rich with meaning and purpose. I've learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the small victories, and the simple joys that once passed me by. And I realize now, more than ever, that Grandma's legacy, her strength, her love, and her unwavering belief in the power of family is something I carry with me every day. Life doesn't always turn out the way we expect, but sometimes the unexpected turns out to be just what we need to grow, to heal, and to find ourselves again. A small reminder. The air that day was cooler than I had expected, a reminder that winter was on its way. It was the kind of morning when the chill in the air makes the smell of fresh coffee all the more comforting, when the sky is just beginning to brighten, but the sun has yet to fully make its appearance. I had just finished my morning routine, taking my time as usual, and sat down at the kitchen table to enjoy a cup of coffee. The radio hummed quietly in the background, the soft tones of an old country song playing low. The sound was familiar, nostalgic even, and for a moment, I allowed myself to just sit there and listen, letting the words of the song wash over me. It was then that it happened. Something so small, so seemingly insignificant, yet it carried with it a weight I couldn't ignore. The song faded into a commercial break, and I reached for the remote to turn it down. But before I could, something caught my attention. The commercial was promoting a local event, a community get-together at the park. It was an invitation to gather with others, to share stories and laughter, to bring back the kind of connection I had been longing for, the kind of connection that I had lost in the years since my husband passed. At first, it seemed like a simple invitation, just one of those things people do in small towns to keep the sense of community alive. But as I listened more closely, something about it hit me deeply. A memory stirred inside me, one that I hadn't thought about in years. It was the memory of my grandmother, sitting in that same kitchen, sharing with me a lesson I hadn't fully understood at the time. She had always told me, never forget the small things. The little things are what hold us together, what make life worth living. At the time, I had brushed off her words, thinking they were just sentimental notions, something she said because she was older, wiser, and more experienced with the ebb and flow of life. But now, as I sat there with that cup of coffee in my hands, I realized that she had been right all along. The small things, the little connections, the brief moments of joy, are the things that shape our lives. The things that hold us up when we feel like we're falling. It was almost as though Grandma's voice was speaking directly to me from the past, reminding me of something I had long since forgotten. The weight of the years, of loss, of grief. It had made me forget the importance of the small moments, the fleeting encounters that, when strung together, create the fabric of life. The invitation on the radio wasn't just a commercial. It was a message, a gentle nudge telling me that it was time to reconnect, time to step out of the silence I had created and find the joy that had been waiting for me all along. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called the number on the screen. The organizer answered almost immediately, and I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me as I heard the warmth in her voice. She told me about the event in greater detail, about the families coming together, the music, the food, the simple joy of being surrounded by community. And then, without hesitation, I found myself saying, "I'll be there." As soon as I hung up the phone, I felt the weight of my decision sink in. It wasn't much, just a simple decision to show up, but it felt like a step forward, a small but important step in a new direction. I wasn't sure what I was expecting from the event. I didn't know if I would find exactly what I was looking for, or if I would walk away feeling the same as I had before. But one thing I knew for sure, I was finally opening myself up to the possibility of something more. The day of the event arrived, and with it came the familiar excitement that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was the kind of excitement you get when you're about to see old friends, or when you know that something good is waiting for you just around the corner. I put on my best coat, the one Grandma had given me years ago, and left the house with a heart that felt lighter than it had in a long time. When I arrived at the park, the air was crisp and filled with the sound of laughter. Families were gathered together, chatting, sharing food, and catching up on old times. It was everything I had been missing, everything I had forgotten how to appreciate. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a sense of belonging, of being part of something greater than myself. As I walked around the park, I saw people I hadn't spoken to in years, neighbors, old friends, people I had known when I was younger. We greeted each other with warm smiles, catching up on the years that had passed, sharing stories of our children and grandchildren. There was a sense of camaraderie in the air, a sense of community that I had long since forgotten. And in that moment, I realized that Grandma had been right all along. It wasn't the grand events or the major milestones that truly mattered. It was the small moments, the simple joys, the everyday connections that make life worth living. At some point during the afternoon, I found myself sitting on a bench by the lake, watching the children run around and play. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden glow over the park, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from having everything figured out, or from knowing exactly where you're headed. It was the kind of peace that comes from simply being present, from taking the time to enjoy the small things, the things that matter most. And in that moment, I knew that I had finally come full circle. I had started this journey alone, carrying the weight of my grief and my past, but now I was beginning to see that there was more to life than the pain. There were still moments of joy, still opportunities to connect, and still so much love to be shared. All it took was a small reminder, a fleeting moment, to show me that the world was still full of beauty and possibility. Awakening. As the days passed, something inside me began to shift. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Just a subtle change in the way I looked at the world. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible, like the first signs of spring that peek out when the winter cold begins to lose its grip. But slowly, I realized that something inside me was waking up. I found myself waking up earlier than usual, without the weight of exhaustion pulling at my bones. The stillness of the mornings had become a sanctuary for me, a time when I could simply breathe without the distractions of the world. I'd sit by the window, sip my coffee, and watch as the sun cast its first golden light on the dew-covered grass. It was the kind of quiet that used to feel oppressive, but now it was a comfort, a moment to simply be. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I found myself moving with a little more purpose. I started walking in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. My feet seemed to carry me with a new energy, as though they knew where to go, even when my mind wasn't quite sure. The path through the park, where I had sat just a few days before, had become a familiar route. It was a space I shared with others, but it was also a space I could claim for myself. On one of my walks, I passed a group of older women chatting by the park benches. They greeted me with smiles, and I found myself stopping to talk with them. It was nothing more than casual conversation at first, discussions about the weather, the upcoming town fair, the usual chatter of people who had known each other for years. But as the conversation went on, I realized something. I felt connected. Not just to these women, but to the life that had been waiting for me on the other side of my grief. There was something about that moment, something so simple, yet so profound. It was as if I had finally started to rejoin the world, to step back into the rhythm of life that had once felt so far away. I had spent so many years isolated by my own sorrow, by the weight of my memories, that I had forgotten how to really engage with others. I had forgotten what it felt like to be a part of something, to be connected to the world around me. The women I spoke to that day had their own stories, stories of love, loss, and resilience. But there was no sadness in their voices. Instead, there was strength, wisdom, and a shared understanding that life, despite its challenges, is still worth living. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't alone in my journey. I was part of something much bigger than myself. It wasn't long before I found myself reaching out more. I called my daughter, something I hadn't done in weeks, and invited her and her family over for dinner. I cooked one of my grandmother's favorite recipes, a dish I had forgotten about until I found the old cookbook buried in the back of the pantry. The smell of the food brought back memories of family dinners, of sitting around the table with Grandma and listening to her stories. That night, as I served the meal and watched my daughter and her family enjoy the food, I felt something stir inside me, a sense of peace, a sense of continuity. The night was filled with laughter, the sound of my grandchildren running through the house, and the warmth of being surrounded by family. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. I didn't feel like I was simply going through the motions. I was present, really present, in a way that I hadn't been in years. It was as if I had finally reconnected with the people I loved, and through that, I had also reconnected with myself. Grandma's words echoed in my mind as I watched my family interact. Never forget the small things. The little things are what hold us together, what make life worth living. I had spent so many years thinking that I needed to have it all figured out, that I needed to have a grand plan for my life. But what I had forgotten was that the beauty of life lies in the small moments, the shared laughter, the quiet walks, the simple acts of love. And in that moment, I understood what Grandma had meant. Life wasn't about achieving perfection or overcoming every obstacle. It was about living, about finding joy in the everyday, in the people who love you, and in the moments that make your heart feel full. After dinner, as the house quieted and my family headed home, I sat alone at the kitchen table once more. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. The weight that had once settled on my chest had lifted, and in its place, there was a sense of calm. I had begun to let go of the past, not the memories, but the grief that had kept me trapped for so long. I had woken up. I was no longer the woman who had sat in silence, trapped by the weight of her past. I was someone who could look forward, someone who could embrace the small moments and find meaning in the everyday. And as I sat there in the quiet of the night, I felt a quiet sense of hope. Hope that whatever the future held, I would be ready to face it. The search. As the days passed, I found myself grappling with a restless energy I couldn't quite explain. It was as if a part of me, long dormant, had finally awakened, and now it was urging me to do something more, to seek something out, to find the missing pieces of a story I had long overlooked. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but the pull was undeniable. One afternoon, I found myself rummaging through the attic, a place I hadn't ventured in years. The space was musty and dim, filled with old boxes of forgotten memories, worn photo albums, discarded furniture, and the remnants of lives lived long ago. But it wasn't just nostalgia that had led me there. It was a quiet, nagging curiosity, a desire to uncover something hidden, something important that I knew deep down was waiting for me. As I sifted through the piles of old belongings, I stumbled across a box I had completely forgotten about. It was made of wood, rough and weathered, the kind of box that looked like it had a story to tell. I pulled it down and opened the lid, the hinges creaking with age. Inside, there were letters, old letters, yellowed with time, bound together with a faded ribbon. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that these weren't just any letters. They were letters from my grandmother. I sat on the dusty floor, the weight of the box in my lap, as I carefully untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, Grandma's neat looping script, the kind I had seen on countless notes and cards over the years. But as I began to read, I realized these weren't just casual letters. These were letters from her early years, written when she was much younger, before she became the woman I had known. And as I read on, I discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about her. The letters spoke of struggles I had never heard of before, of times when Grandma had been forced to make impossible choices, of hardships I had never imagined her enduring. She had written about the pain of loss, the fear of the unknown, and the loneliness that had followed her like a shadow through much of her early life. She had faced battles I had never known about, battles that had shaped the woman I had come to admire so deeply. It was hard to reconcile the image I had always had of Grandma with the woman described in these letters. I had seen her as a pillar of strength, as someone who could weather any storm without breaking. But these letters revealed a different side of her, a side that had been hidden from me, tucked away behind the veil of her quiet strength. She had been vulnerable, scared, and uncertain at times, just like anyone else. But she had never shown that to us. She had never allowed us to see her struggle. Instead, she had protected us, shielding us from the weight of her own burdens. And in doing so, she had become the foundation of our family. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading through every letter in that box. Each one revealed more about my grandmother's past, about the woman she had been before she became the matriarch of our family. And with each letter, I began to understand her more deeply, not just as the woman who had always been there for me, but as the woman who had lived a life filled with challenges and sacrifices, the woman who had carried the weight of her past in silence. The more I read, the more I realized that Grandma's strength wasn't something that had come easily to her. It was something she had earned through years of hardship and heartache. And I began to see that the love she had given us, the protection she had offered, was not just a natural instinct. It was a choice to love us fiercely, to shield us from the pain she had endured, to give us a better life than the one she had known. As I sat there in the quiet of the attic, surrounded by the remnants of the past, I felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the woman who had shaped my life in ways I could never fully appreciate until now. I had always known that Grandma was special, but I hadn't understood just how much she had sacrificed for us, how much she had carried on her own shoulders to ensure that we were safe, loved, and cared for. I folded the letters carefully and placed them back in the box, the weight of their significance settling in my heart. I knew that these letters were not just a glimpse into Grandma's past. They were a gift, a treasure trove of wisdom and love that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. And though I couldn't bring her back, couldn't undo the years that had passed, I knew that I could honor her legacy by living my life with the same strength, courage, and love that she had shown me. The next day, I called my daughter again, this time with a different sense of purpose. "I want to tell you something," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've found something about Grandma. And I think it's time we all know the full story." I could almost hear her smile through the phone as she listened. And in that moment, I realized that my search wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about sharing it, about passing on the lessons and the love that my grandmother had given us. It was about keeping her memory alive, not just in my heart, but in the hearts of those who came after me. I had found the answers I didn't know I was searching for, and in doing so, I had found a new way to move forward. A new way to live, to love, and to carry on the legacy of the woman who had protected us all. A revelation. It wasn't until I spoke to my daughter that I realized how much I had been carrying on my own. I had spent so many years buried in my grief, buried in the past, that I hadn't noticed the weight of it all until I began to speak about it out loud. It wasn't until I shared what I had uncovered about my grandmother's life that I realized how much of her story had remained untold, even within our own family. My daughter, who had always looked up to my mother with admiration, was just as moved by the letters as I had been. She asked questions I hadn't thought to ask, offering a perspective that was fresh and new to me. Together, we pieced together the fragments of my grandmother's past. The things I had overlooked, the things she had never said. There were secrets in those letters, secrets that Grandma had carried with her, but had never shared with anyone. One letter in particular caught our attention. It was dated back to the early years of her marriage, a time when things weren't as easy as I had assumed. Grandma had written about a period of deep loneliness, a time when she had struggled with the weight of responsibility, the pressure to be perfect, to always be the rock for her family. In one letter, she admitted something that shocked me. She had questioned whether she was enough. She had wondered if the sacrifices she made for the family had been worth it, whether anyone truly understood the burden she carried. At first, I couldn't believe it. The woman I had known, the one who had always been so strong, so certain, had once felt as if she wasn't enough? The realization hit me like a tidal wave, washing over me in a flood of emotion. Grandma, the woman who had protected us with such devotion, had once doubted herself. And that self-doubt, I now understood, was part of what had driven her to be so relentless in her love and care for our family. She had given everything she had, but at a personal cost that no one had ever truly seen. As I read the letter aloud to my daughter, I could hear the tremor in my own voice. The idea that my grandmother had struggled with her own insecurities, had been uncertain, even vulnerable, was something I had never imagined. It was a side of her that was hidden from me, from all of us. She had never let us see her weaknesses, had never allowed us to witness her moments of doubt. She had been the pillar we all leaned on, the one who always knew what to do, the one who made everything seem easy, even when it wasn't. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I had always thought of myself as a good daughter, a good mother. But had I been as selfless as she was? Had I given enough? Had I been present enough, in the ways that mattered? I began to see the parallels between her struggles and my own, the quiet sacrifices I had made for my family, the moments when I had hidden my own fears behind a facade of strength. But as much as I felt a sense of personal revelation, I also felt a deep sense of gratitude. Grandma's story, her letters, had opened my eyes to the depth of her love and resilience. She had given us more than we had ever known, and in doing so, she had created a legacy I hadn't fully appreciated until now. I shared my thoughts with my daughter, and she too understood the magnitude of what we had found. We talked for hours, processing everything together. In the end, I realized that this wasn't just a story about my grandmother. It was a story about family, about how we all carry burdens, how we all struggle, how we all question ourselves at times. But it was also a story about strength, about the quiet power that comes from love and sacrifice. I now understood that the strength I admired in Grandma wasn't just something she was born with. It was something she had cultivated over a lifetime of facing her own fears and doubts. She had built her strength not by pretending to be invincible, but by confronting her vulnerabilities and choosing to rise above them. As I sat with my daughter, we made a pact to carry on Grandma's legacy, to honor her memory by living our lives with the same strength and resilience she had shown us. But more than that, we vowed to be open with each other, to share our struggles and our doubts, to never allow ourselves to carry the weight of the world in silence the way Grandma had. The more we talked, the more I realized that this wasn't just about uncovering secrets. It was about healing, about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to acknowledge that it's okay not to have everything figured out. It was about breaking the cycle of silence and allowing ourselves to be truly seen. As I closed the box of letters, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Grandma had given me the gift of understanding, of seeing her not just as the strong, invincible woman I had always known, but as a person who had fought her own battles, who had loved with everything she had, and who had made choices that shaped the future of our family. And with that understanding came a deep sense of connection, not just to Grandma, but to my daughter, to the generations that came before us, and to the ones that would come after. We were all part of this story, all bound together by love, by sacrifice, and by the quiet, unseen strength that runs through every family. The revelation. The next week, I found myself standing at the kitchen table, my hand shaking slightly as I held the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was familiar, but still it sent a ripple of unease through me. It was Sarah, my niece, calling to check in. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but it felt good to hear her voice again, even though I knew the conversation was bound to bring back memories that I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "I've been thinking about Grandma," Sarah said, her voice soft, but filled with that characteristic curiosity I remembered from her childhood. "You know, Mom always told me stories about her, about how strong she was. But after reading some of those letters, I've realized that there was so much more to her than I knew. I smiled gently, surprised at how Sarah's words mirrored my own thoughts from the days before. It seemed as though we were both piecing together the same puzzle, uncovering truths we had never known. It was as if Grandma's story had never truly been shared, just passed down through fragments, her strength never fully explained. I was glad that Sarah was curious enough to ask the questions, to wonder about the side of Grandma we'd never truly seen. "I know what you mean," I replied, my voice catching slightly. "It's strange, isn't it? The way we always saw her as the one who held everything together, but we never really knew what she was holding back." There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Do you think she ever regretted not sharing more with us? Do you think she wanted us to know?" That was the question I had been avoiding, the question that had hovered over me ever since I had uncovered those letters. I hadn't wanted to face the possibility that maybe Grandma had held back so much because she felt we couldn't handle the truth, or maybe because she didn't want to burden us with her own pain. But now, as I thought about it, I realized that she had never meant to hide anything from us. She had simply carried it all so that we wouldn't have to. "I don't think she regretted it," I said finally, my words steady now, despite the turmoil that still lingered in my chest. "I think Grandma just loved us too much to burden us with her struggles. But at the same time, she must have known that one day we'd have to understand. Maybe that's why she kept everything tucked away so carefully." "You're right," Sarah said softly, as though she understood now too. "She was so selfless. I guess we never really appreciated just how much she carried for all of us." We both fell silent for a few moments, the weight of what we had discovered settling in. I thought about the years of Grandma's life, the struggles she had endured quietly, never asking for anything in return. She had faced her own battles with strength, and perhaps that was part of the reason why she'd kept her pain hidden, because she didn't want anyone else to carry it. "Do you think she ever told anyone?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence once more. "I mean, about all the things she went through?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. Not really. I think she told us little bits here and there, but only when it was necessary. She didn't want to burden anyone, especially not us. But the more I read, the more I realized how much strength it took for her to keep going, how much love she poured into everything she did. "Do you think we can ever live up to that?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. "I mean, I don't know if I could ever be that strong." I smiled, the warmth of the memory of Grandma washing over me once again. "You know, I don't think it's about living up to her. It's about carrying her legacy forward. We don't need to be exactly like her. We just need to understand the love she gave us and honor that by being the best versions of ourselves. We've got her strength inside us, too." There was another long pause. I could hear Sarah's quiet breathing on the other end of the line, and I knew that she was processing everything just as I had in those quiet moments alone, after reading those letters. The truth was, we would never fully understand what Grandma had gone through. We would never know exactly what it felt like to walk in her shoes. But we could learn from her, learn how to love without hesitation, how to carry burdens without breaking, and how to protect those we love, even when the world tries to tear us apart. "I think I'm ready to share her story with the family," Sarah said, breaking the silence once again. "Not just the good parts, but the hard parts too. She deserves for us to know everything." "I agree," I said, feeling the truth of her words deep in my heart. "It's time." And with that, a weight lifted from my shoulders. It was time to share the full story of Grandma's life, the parts we hadn't known, the parts that had remained hidden for so long. It was time to tell the world about the woman who had given us everything, even when she hadn't been asked to. It was time to honor her, truly honor her, by passing on the lessons she had taught us, the lessons of love, resilience, and strength. As I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. I had uncovered Grandma's secrets, but more importantly, I had uncovered a deeper understanding of myself. I had learned that it wasn't just about what we do for others. It's about understanding why we do it and learning to forgive ourselves for the things we keep hidden. In the end, it was love that had carried Grandma through. And it would carry us too. The aftermath. After Sarah and I decided it was time to share Grandma's story with the family, everything seemed to settle into a strange kind of calm. The truth, once hidden beneath layers of silence, had begun to take root, and there was no going back. It was as though we had opened a door that had been closed for years, and now the light was pouring in, illuminating the parts of our family's history that had been cast in shadow. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking a lot about the legacy we were inheriting. There was something profound in knowing that we were all connected by the same thread, by the love and sacrifices Grandma had made for us. But there was also something painful in realizing just how much she had endured without anyone ever truly knowing. It made me question the way we all lived our lives, the way we hid parts of ourselves in order to protect the ones we loved. The first family gathering after the revelation was, as expected, a bit awkward. Everyone had their own reactions, their own feelings about what we had uncovered. My siblings were quiet, more reflective than usual. They had always known Grandma as the unshakable matriarch, the woman who always had everything under control. Learning about her struggles, her fears, her doubts, it shook something in them. It was a reminder that even the strongest among us have their moments of vulnerability. We gathered around the old dining table at my house, the same table where we'd shared so many meals over the years. The scent of roast chicken filled the air, and the table was laid with the same dishes Grandma used to serve at every family dinner. I watched as my children and grandchildren settled into their usual seats, the familiar rhythm of family life returning. But something was different now. We were no longer just a family bound together by blood. We were a family bound together by the truth, by the understanding that we had all inherited something from Grandma that we could never fully repay. As we sat down to eat, the conversation started slowly. There was some small talk at first, but eventually, the elephant in the room had to be addressed. My daughter, Sarah's cousin, was the first to bring it up. "Grandma's letters," she said quietly, her voice almost hesitant. "They really made me think about everything we've been through as a family." The room grew quiet, and I could feel the weight of everyone's attention on me. It was my turn now to speak, to help us process all that we had learned. "You know," I said, clearing my throat, "when I first found those letters, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know how to handle the truth of it all. But what I realized, in the end, is that Grandma's strength wasn't in being perfect. It was in the way she loved us, in the way she gave of herself even when it hurt." I paused, letting my words sink in. I could see that everyone was listening now, really listening, in a way they hadn't before. I continued, my voice soft but steady. "Grandma never wanted us to feel sorry for her. She didn't want us to see her pain, because she believed that love was enough. But now, I think it's time for us to understand the whole picture, to honor not just the love she gave us, but the person she was, the one who carried so much on her own, quietly, without complaint." There was a long silence after that. No one spoke for a few moments, and I could see the tears in my son's eyes. tears I had never seen before. He was the strong one, the one who had always seemed so unaffected by the ups and downs of life. But in that moment, I saw the truth in his gaze, the understanding that Grandma had not been invincible, but that her strength had been forged through love and sacrifice, not without cost. My brother, who had always been a man of few words, cleared his throat and spoke up. I never really understood her, not like you do now. She was always there, always the one who held us together. But I never thought about what it cost her, what she had to hide just to keep us safe. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I think we all owe her more than we ever realized. The room was still, filled with the quiet sound of reflection. But something had shifted. The air felt different, more open. There was no more pretending, no more acting like everything had been fine all along. We had all been touched by the truth, by the revelation of Grandma's quiet strength and the love she had given us without expecting anything in return. Later that evening, as the house quieted down and the last of the dishes were washed, I found myself alone in the living room, sitting in the same chair where I had sat for years. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and the house felt warmer, more alive. I thought about all the things we had learned, about the stories that had been shared, and about the way our family had changed, just a little, with the passing of this truth. In the aftermath of the revelation, there was still sorrow. Sorrow for the things left unsaid, for the years that had been lost. But there was also something else. Peace. We had shared something real, something that had been hidden from us for so long. We had uncovered not just Grandma's story, but our own. We had taken the first steps toward healing, toward understanding one another on a deeper level. It wasn't the end of our journey, but it was a beginning of something stronger, something more honest. And as I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that, in many ways, we were all just like Grandma, carrying our burdens in silence, protecting the ones we love, and doing our best to keep it all together. But now, we knew the truth, and that truth would set us free. The final goodbye. The days after that family gathering were filled with a quiet kind of reflection. It was as if the weight of all that had been shared hung in the air, settling into the crevices of our home, our hearts, our minds. We were changed now, changed by the stories of my grandmother's strength and sacrifices, by the way we had finally come to see her as a woman, not just a matriarch, not just the rock who held everything together. She had been human, after all, and knowing that made me love her even more. But the time to say goodbye had come, and there was a finality in the air that none of us could ignore. My grandmother had lived a long life, a life full of love, hardship, and grace. Her passing had left a hole in our family that we had never quite been able to fill. Though we had learned to move on, we had never truly said goodbye. I remember the evening we gathered to spread her ashes. It was a quiet, overcast day, the kind where the world feels still, as though time itself has decided to pause for a moment. We all met at the lake, the one where Grandma had loved to walk in the early mornings, when the mist still hung low over the water and the world was waking up. It was her place, a place where she could find peace, where she could think and reflect. The air was cool but not cold, a perfect autumn day. We stood together on the shore, surrounded by the peacefulness of the lake, the rustling of the trees, the quiet hum of life that seemed to echo her own. My heart felt heavy, knowing that this was it, our final farewell. There would be no more phone calls, no more visits, no more moments shared over a cup of tea. I took the small wooden box in my hands, the box that had held her ashes for so long. My fingers trembled slightly as I held it, but my mind was calm. This was the last step, the final act of letting go. As I opened the box, the scent of lavender and cedarwood seemed to rise, as if Grandma was still with us, reminding us of the love she had always given. It was a comforting thought. One by one, we each took a moment to stand by the water, to hold the ashes, and to say our own goodbyes. I watched my children, my siblings, and their children. All of us gathered here, bound by the love of a woman who had given everything for us, who had made our lives better simply by being herself. When it was my turn, I stood quietly by the water's edge, the wind gently ruffling my hair. I felt her presence, felt her love, surrounding me in that moment. I thought about everything she had taught me, about the strength and resilience she had shown me without ever asking for recognition. I thought about how much I had taken for granted, how much I had overlooked in my search for meaning. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, the words more for myself than for anyone else. "Thank you for everything. I will carry your love with me, always." And then, with a deep breath, I scattered the ashes into the water. As they floated away, the ripples on the surface of the lake seemed to mirror the ripples in my heart, quiet, but ever moving, ever changing. I knew that this wasn't just the end. It was a new beginning, a beginning where her love would live on in each of us, in the lessons we had learned, in the way we carried her spirit forward in our own lives. The rest of the family stood in silence, the only sounds the whispering of the wind and the soft lapping of the water against the shore. For a long moment, no one spoke. We didn't need to. We all understood that the goodbye was more than just the act of scattering her ashes. It was the act of finally letting go of the pain, of embracing the lessons she had left us with, of honoring her life by living our own with the same strength and love that she had shown us. As the last of her ashes drifted away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was a peace I hadn't expected, a peace born of understanding. It was as though, in that moment, everything had come full circle. We had been given the gift of Grandma's love, and now it was time to pass that love on, to our children, our grandchildren, to the world around us. The sun broke through the clouds just as we turned to leave. The golden light bathed the lake, casting a warm glow over everything. It felt like a sign that Grandma was at peace, that we were at peace, and that we were ready to move forward, carrying her memory with us. The drive back home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts, but there was a lightness in the air now. The heaviness had lifted, replaced by something stronger, something enduring. And as I sat in the front seat, staring out at the road ahead, I knew that our family was whole again, that the love we had for one another was enough to carry us through whatever came next. It wasn't goodbye. Not really. It was a new chapter. And as long as we kept her memory alive in our hearts, Grandma would never truly be gone. She would always be with us, in every act of love, in every gesture of kindness, in every moment that made life worth living. A quiet moment of reflection. A few weeks had passed since we said our final goodbye to Grandma, and while life had slowly returned to its regular rhythm, there were moments when the quiet felt a little too heavy, when the absence of her presence was acutely felt. It wasn't the kind of absence you could fill with any number of distractions or routines. It was the kind of absence that left a void, a space that you couldn't quite define but knew was there. It was on one of these quiet evenings, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, that I found myself back at the lake, where we had scattered Grandma's ashes. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, the soft light reflecting off the water in a way that made everything seem peaceful, almost sacred. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt still, and I had the overwhelming sense that I was in the right place at the right time. I walked slowly along the shore, my footsteps soft against the earth, the sound of my shoes almost swallowed by the peaceful hum of nature. The air was crisp with the promise of the coming winter, and a slight breeze ruffled my hair. It felt good to be here again, to be close to this place that had held so many memories, and now, so many new ones. I couldn't help but think back to the time we had spent with Grandma at the lake, those quiet afternoons where we would sit together, watching the ripples on the water, listening to the birds overhead. She had always loved this spot. It had been her sanctuary, her place to reflect, to find peace in the quiet. And now I understood why. I stopped near the water's edge, the familiar scent of earth and water filling my senses. As I gazed out over the lake, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For all the love Grandma had given, for all the wisdom she had shared, for the way she had shaped our family with her quiet strength. But more than that, I felt thankful for the space she had left me, space to grow, to understand, to heal. Sitting down on a large, flat rock near the shore, I allowed myself to reflect. I thought about the years before Grandma's passing, the way I had lived so much of my life under the weight of grief and regret. I had been afraid to confront the things that scared me, afraid to truly understand what had shaped me and the family around me. But now, sitting by this lake, I realized how far I had come. How much had changed within me since that day when I first discovered Grandma's letters. It was as if the truth had unlocked something deep within me. Something I had forgotten was there. In the quiet of my own reflection, I began to see just how much my grandmother's strength had become part of me, how her love had passed through the generations, and how I now had the responsibility to carry that forward. Not in the way she had, necessarily, but in my own way, with my own strengths and weaknesses. The world around me was still, but I could feel the pulse of life underneath it all. The gentle push of the water, the rustling of the trees, the soft sound of birds singing in the distance. It was the sound of the world moving forward, and I was moving with it. I had spent so long frozen in time, held back by the weight of my own grief and the fear of what lay ahead. But now, with every passing day, I felt myself becoming lighter, more at peace with the past, more open to what the future held. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the water, I closed my eyes and let the moment wash over me. I thought of my family, of my children and grandchildren, and of the legacy I wanted to leave behind. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having all the answers or always knowing what to do. It was about showing up. It was about loving with everything you had, even when it was hard. It was about being there for the people you cared about and giving them the same strength Grandma had given me, quietly, gently, without expectation. I thought about the things we had learned in the days following her passing, the way we had come together as a family, the way we had shared the stories of our past, and the way we had finally begun to understand one another. It was a beginning, and though it was hard to see the full picture yet, I knew it was something important. We were moving forward, together. The last light of the day faded, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. The night was settling in, calm and peaceful. I stood up, dusting off my pants, and took one last look at the lake. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, my voice carrying on the wind. "For everything." And as I turned to leave, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. The quiet moments, the small gestures, the simple acts of love, they were what truly mattered. And now, it was my turn to carry that love forward. The conclusion. The days after that quiet evening by the lake felt different. The shift in my heart was subtle, but undeniable. Life had always been full of noise, of schedules, of obligations, of to-do lists. But now, for the first time in a long while, I found myself seeking the quiet. The simple act of sitting on my porch in the early morning, listening to the world wake up, became an act of reflection. I began to realize just how much I had missed by constantly rushing through my days, trying to meet expectations that were never truly my own. I still had moments of sadness, of course. How could I not? Losing Grandma had left a hole that nothing could fully fill. But I also understood now that she had never truly left. She lived on in the stories we shared, in the ways we loved one another, and in the quiet strength that had been passed down through the generations. As I watched my children and grandchildren interact, I saw pieces of her in them, her warmth, her resilience, her unwavering belief in the power of love. It wasn't about trying to replicate her, or even trying to live up to her. It was about understanding the essence of who she was, and carrying that forward in a way that made sense for me, for my family, for the future. In my heart, I knew she would be proud of how we had come together, of how we had learned to honor her memory not by idolizing her, but by embracing the lessons she had left us. A few weeks after our time at the lake, I found myself standing in front of the old photo album again, the one filled with pictures of Grandma, her youthful smile, her gentle gaze, her strength. The photographs had always been a part of my life, but now I saw them with new eyes. I saw the woman she had been, not just the matriarch, not just the protector, but a person with dreams, with pain, with joy, and with an immeasurable capacity to love. I had spent so many years looking at her as someone I couldn't measure up to, someone I couldn't fully understand. But now, I saw her as an equal, as someone who had walked a difficult road, and whose journey had shaped mine in ways I had never fully realized. I ran my fingers over the worn edges of the album, thinking about how much time had passed since those pictures were taken. I had lived so much of my life under the shadow of grief, holding on to what had been, and now I was finally letting go. Letting go of the idea that the past was something I could hold on to forever. Letting go of the belief that the people we love are ever truly gone, that their stories and their legacies fade with time. I thought about what Grandma had taught me in those final years of her life, about how love doesn't fade. It just transforms. She had shown me, in the way she lived, that love isn't something you leave behind when you pass away. It's something you pass forward, like a torch that keeps burning, lighting the way for others. With each passing day, I became more attuned to the idea that love is a living, breathing thing. It's in the way we show up for each other, the way we care for one another, the way we find beauty in the small moments. It's in the quiet laughter shared over a cup of tea, the quiet understanding between a parent and child, the way we listen without judgment. In these small gestures, in these everyday acts of kindness, we carry forward the legacy of those who came before us. I had learned to live for today, to embrace the present and the future without being weighed down by the past. I had learned that healing doesn't always come with grand gestures. It comes in the stillness, in the simple acts of living, of moving forward with love and grace. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this was what Grandma had always wanted for us. Her strength was not in her ability to shield us from pain, but in her ability to show us that no matter how hard life became, we could always find a way through. That we could always rise, even when the world seemed to be falling apart around us. Her love, that quiet and steadfast love, was the anchor that had kept us grounded. And now, it was the anchor that would guide us forward. I closed the album, a sense of peace settling over me, There was no need to hold on to the past any longer. Not in the way I had been. I had learned to let go of the pain, to embrace the love, and to carry forward the lessons Grandma had imparted so quietly, so consistently, throughout her life. As I sat there in the quiet of my home, the warmth of the evening sun pouring through the windows, I realized that I had finally found a kind of peace that had eluded me for so long. The journey wasn't over, of course. There would always be challenges ahead, moments of uncertainty and grief. But now, I had the strength to face them, not alone, but with the love and lessons of my grandmother in my heart. And that, I knew, was more than enough. The message. As the months passed, I found myself often reflecting on the lessons Grandma had taught me. Lessons that, once revealed, had begun to shape the way I saw the world. There was one lesson in particular that had stayed with me, echoing in my mind whenever life became overwhelming, or when I felt lost in the sea of everyday struggles. It was a lesson that had been passed down through generations, one that was never spoken outright, but one that had been quietly woven into the fabric of our family. And it was that lesson, more than any other, that had changed everything for me. Love, Grandma had taught me, is the strongest force in the universe. But it's not just the love we show when things are easy, when life is peaceful. It's the love we show when life is hard, when we're hurting, when we don't have all the answers. It's the love that doesn't ask for anything in return, the kind of love that gives without expecting, that forgives without hesitation. It's the kind of love that doesn't wait for the perfect moment, but creates one instead. I remember the day I understood that love, in all its forms, was not just a feeling, but a choice. It came one afternoon when I found myself sitting in Grandma's old rocking chair, the one that still creaked when I sat down, just like it did all those years ago. I had been sitting there for a while, reflecting on everything I had learned from her, when I realized that the most important thing she had taught me was not how to be strong, or how to endure, but how to love. It was a simple thought, but one that shifted my perspective entirely. I had always thought of love as something that was given to us, something we received from others. But now I understood that love was something we give, something we choose every day. It's a choice to be present, to show up for the people we care about, to offer a kind word or a listening ear when it's needed most. It's a choice to give, even when we're afraid, even when we don't know what the future holds. As I sat there, I thought about all the times I had been afraid to love fully, afraid of losing, afraid of being hurt. But Grandma had never been afraid. She loved us with a fierce, unwavering love, even when life tested her, even when it seemed impossible. She showed me that love isn't just about what we feel. It's about what we do, the choices we make every day to nurture and protect those around us. I realized then that Grandma's legacy wasn't just in the stories she left behind or the wisdom she passed down. Her legacy was in the love she gave us, the love that had shaped our family, the love that had kept us going through the toughest of times. It wasn't just the love of a grandmother. It was the love of a woman who had chosen, every single day, to give everything she had to those she cared about. That night, as I lay in bed, the quiet stillness of the house around me, I made a vow. I vowed to carry on Grandma's legacy, not just in my memories but in my actions. I would choose love every day. I would choose to love my family with the same depth, the same quiet strength that she had. I would show up for them, even when it was hard. I would listen, even when I didn't have the answers. I would forgive, even when it felt impossible. I would give without expecting, just as she had done. In doing so, I knew I would honor her memory, not by living in the past, not by trying to be the person she had been, but by living fully in the present, by loving fully in the present. It wasn't just about keeping her memory alive. It was about keeping her spirit alive through the way I loved, the way I chose to be there for the people who mattered most. Grandma's death had taught me many things, but the most important lesson of all was that love, in all its forms, was the answer to everything. It was the answer to pain, to loss, to fear. Love is what holds us together when everything else falls apart. It's the thread that binds us to the people who matter, and the foundation upon which everything else is built. And so, as I continue on this journey, I carry her with me, not just in my heart, but in the choices I make every day. The choices to love, to forgive, to be present. The choices to build a life that honors the legacy she left behind. A life full of love, full of connection, full of meaning. Because in the end, love is the only thing that truly lasts. It is the thing that makes us who we are, the thing that guides us through even the darkest of days. And as I move forward, I know that love will always be my compass, just as it was hers. Grandma's message, the one that she had given to us all without ever saying a word, was clear. Love is what matters most. Love is what makes life worth living. And love is what will carry us through, no matter what comes next. In this final part of the story, the protagonist reflects on the lessons learned from their grandmother's life, particularly the power of love. After reading the letters Grandma left behind, the protagonist realizes that Grandma's true strength wasn't in her ability to shield the family from pain, but in her unwavering choice to love unconditionally, even when it was difficult. Through the grandmother's example, the protagonist discovers that love is an active choice, a decision we make every day to show up, be present, and nurture those around us. The protagonist vows to carry on Grandma's legacy by living a life rooted in love, choosing to forgive, listen, and support their family as Grandma had. By living with love, the protagonist finds peace and understanding, realizing that love is what holds everything together, through the hard times and the good. It's the thread that binds families and the foundation of everything meaningful. The protagonist, deeply impacted by the grandmother's quiet strength and generosity, now carries the responsibility to continue her legacy in their own life, showing up for their family and embracing the true power of love. Thank you for watching and reflecting with me on this touching grandma story. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share where you're watching from and let us know what you think. And don't miss our next video, where we'll share another true story about a grandmother's wisdom and strength. Stay tuned for more heartfelt tales in the world of family, love, and resilience.